Van Helsing. Friends, if you want to watch the super hit movie Van Helsing, 2004, in English, then make sure to like this video right now. And if you're visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and press the bell icon so you never miss an update. In today's video, we're going to talk about a thrilling action horror movie, Van Helsing, 2004. We'll explore what this movie is all about and where you can watch it online, whether on OTT platforms or satellite TV channels. I'll also be sharing some really interesting and lesser-known facts about this film. You'll get full information about its technical team, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, and box office collection. We'll also break down the movie's storyline, character details, and give you a short review of the plot. On top of that, we'll talk about the actors' performances and which stars played which iconic roles in the film. So friends, I request you to please watch this video till the end because you don't want to miss any part of this detailed review and fact-filled breakdown of Van Helsing, 2004. Narrative Structure Overview. Van Helsing, 2004, directed by Stephen Sommers, presents a gothic action-adventure narrative that blends classic horror mythologies with fast-paced storytelling. The film follows a relatively conventional linear narrative but is heavily stylized, cinematic, and driven by episodic set-pieces. While the structure is traditional, introduction, rising action, climax, and resolution, the film stands out through its grand scope, shifting settings, and rapid narrative momentum. Opening and initial setup. The film opens with a black-and-white homage to old Universal horror films, depicting Dr. Frankenstein's laboratory in Transylvania, where he is coerced into completing his monster by Count Dracula. However, Frankenstein is soon murdered by Dracula, leading to the iconic monster escaping into the windmill pursued by an angry mob. This prologue sets the tone, a theatrical and dark fairy tale with strong roots in monster lore. We then transition to Van Helsing, a mysterious monster hunter employed by the Vatican, introduced in a fast-paced action sequence in Paris where he battles Mr. Hyde. This segment not only showcases Van Helsing's combat skills and gadgets but also introduces a central theme. He is a man tormented by forgotten sins and fragmented memories of his past, struggling with the morality of his actions. Call to adventure and rising action. Van Helsing is sent by the Vatican to Transylvania to assist the Valerious family in their centuries-long battle against Dracula. The stakes are established. Unless Dracula is defeated, the souls of the Valerious family cannot ascend to heaven. This provides the film with a spiritual and moral anchor. Accompanied by the comic relief Friar Karl, Van Helsing travels to Transylvania, where he meets Anna Valerious, a fierce warrior princess fighting to protect her people. Here the first major turning point occurs as the group is attacked by Dracula's brides, introducing supernatural horror and revealing the true extent of Dracula's power. Key conflicts and middle arcs. The central conflict deepens as Van Helsing learns of Dracula's plan to use Frankenstein's monster to bring life to his undead offspring. This storyline gives emotional depth to the monster, portrayed as intelligent and misunderstood, echoing Mary Shelley's original themes. Several episodic encounters follow, including the capture and escape of Frankenstein's monster, Anna's abduction and rescue, a perilous journey to Dracula's frozen fortress in the mountains. These sequences build tension and add layers to the character dynamics, particularly between Anna and Van Helsing, whose relationship grows more personal and emotionally charged. The narrative also explores Van Helsing's dark past, revealing that he may be the left hand of God, cursed with immortality. This subplot, though not deeply explored, adds mystery and weight to his character arc. Climax. The climactic battle takes place in Dracula's castle during a masquerade ball that turns into a full-blown vampire war zone. Van Helsing ultimately transforms into a werewolf, the only creature capable of killing Dracula due to an ancient prophecy. This transformation represents both a literal and symbolic descent into the beast within. The battle between werewolf Van Helsing and Dracula, in his monstrous form, is a visual and emotional high point. Dracula is finally killed, and his children are destroyed. However, the cost is high. Anna dies in the process, injecting tragedy into the victory. Resolution. In the closing moments, Van Helsing cremates Anna's body and sees a vision of her reunited with her family in heaven, offering him peace and closure. Frankenstein's monster sails away in mourning, representing the film's theme of misunderstood outcasts. Van Helsing rides off into the horizon, still haunted by his past but having brought resolution to the Valerious family and dealt a significant blow to evil. The ending is both conclusive and open-ended, leaving room for future adventures. Emotional and thematic impact. At its core, Van Helsing grapples with themes of redemption and damnation, the morality of killing monsters who may be more human than they seem, The burden of legacy and ancestral duty, embodied by Anna. The blurred line between good and evil. Despite its action-heavy narrative, the film weaves in emotional beats, especially the tragic bond between Van Helsing and Anna, and the empathy shown toward Frankenstein's monster. Final thoughts on narrative execution. While the plot adheres to conventional structure, its melodramatic tone, Gothic grandeur, and mythological mashup create a uniquely cinematic experience. The pacing is brisk, sometimes to a fault, sacrificing deeper character exploration for spectacle. However, it succeeds in delivering a thrilling rollercoaster ride filled with iconic horror reimaginings, making it both nostalgic and fresh for fans of classic monster lore. Let me know if you'd like sections on character arcs, symbolism, or genre execution for Van Helsing, 2004. Van Helsing, 2004, plot and narrative analysis, in great detail. Directed by Stephen Sommers. Starring Hugh Jackman, Van Helsing, Kate Beckinsale, Anna Valerious, Richard Roxburgh, Count Dracula. Narrative framework, traditional with Gothic action layers. The film follows a linear three-act structure, but it wraps its progression in rich Gothic horror aesthetics, modern action, and mythological crossover storytelling. It doesn't employ non-linear timelines or fragmented perspectives but leans into cinematic spectacle, suspense, and a whirlwind pace to drive the narrative forward. Act 1, Introduction and Setup. Opening Scene, Prologue, 1887, Transylvania. The film begins with a bold, black-and-white homage to the Universal monster classics. We witness Dr. Victor Frankenstein completing his legendary experiment in a lightning-filled lab, bringing his monster to life. But this is no mere homage, it's the beginning of Dracula's grand plan. Dracula funded Frankenstein's work only to use the monster as a conduit to bring life to his own offspring. Small orange diamond conflict introduced, Frankenstein's morality clashes with Dracula's monstrous ambition. Frankenstein is killed. The monster, showing early signs of emotional depth, escapes with his creator's body. He seeks refuge in a windmill that's soon burned by an angry mob, classic imagery with modern pacing. Cut to Paris, present day, late 19th century. In one of the film's boldest and most stylized transitions, we meet Gabriel Van Helsing, fighting the monstrous Mr. Hyde in Notre Dame Cathedral. The combat is fierce, fast, and infused with steampunk-style gadgets, immediately signaling that this is not a slow-burning horror film but an action-driven supernatural adventure. Small blue diamond themes introduced, redemption, moral ambiguity, identity, and monstrosity. Small blue diamond character setup. Van Helsing is a haunted man, working for the secretive Holy Order of the Vatican, battling supernatural threats, and suffering from amnesia about his past. He dreams of past sins he doesn't remember committing. Medium black circle Act 2, Rising Action, Transylvania Mission. Mission Briefing. Van Helsing is summoned by Cardinal Jeanette, who assigns him to go to Transylvania to aid the Valerious family, whose members are fated to be denied heaven unless Dracula is defeated. He is accompanied by Karl, a friar who provides both comic relief and crucial scientific support. Small orange diamond narrative purpose establishes the stakes, spiritual salvation, not just monster hunting. Arrival in Transylvania. The setting shifts to the foggy, foreboding landscape of Eastern Europe, filled with angry villagers, crumbling castles, and myths come alive. Van Helsing meets Anna Valerious, the fierce, last living heir of the Valerious bloodline. Within moments of arrival, the village is attacked by Dracula's three brides, creating a thrilling action set piece. The brides, Aelira, Verona, and Marischka, are seductive, terrifying, and airborne. One is killed by Van Helsing using a newfangled automatic crossbow. Small blue diamond key conflict. Dracula is not just a vampire, he's an ancient warlord with a centuries-long vendetta, determined to use Frankenstein's monster and forbidden science to resurrect thousands of unborn vampire offspring. Small blue diamond character dynamics. A growing alliance and subtle romantic tension between Anna and Van Helsing begins here, rooted in shared purpose and mutual loss. Medium black circle Act 3, deeper mysteries and escalation of conflict. The Frankenstein monster lives. It's revealed that Frankenstein's monster survived the windmill fire and is now in hiding. He becomes a key figure in the plot. Unlike most adaptations, this monster is intelligent, spiritual, and eloquent. He is not the villain but a tragic soul. Dracula needs the monster as a conduit for energy to bring his unborn vampire children to life. Without the monster, his science fails. This transforms the monster into a MacGuffin, but also a character with a moral arc. Small orange diamond Van Helsing's dilemma. He is torn between destroying all monsters and protecting this innocent creation. This moral conflict is central to his journey as a redeemer, not a killer. Werewolves and betrayal. Dracula has developed a virus that turns humans into werewolves, and Anna's brother Vulcan becomes one of them. Dracula's werewolves serve him as henchmen, and the film explores the werewolf as a cursed soul, not merely a beast. Small Blue Diamond turning point. Van Helsing himself is bitten and slowly begins transforming into a werewolf, ironically making him the only creature capable of killing Dracula, according to an ancient prophecy. Medium black circle ACT4. Climax. Confrontation in Dracula's castle. The final showdown. Set during a masquerade ball and a final assault on Dracula's icy, sprawling lair, the third act explodes with action. While Karl and Frankenstein's monster attempt to sabotage Dracula's machines, Van Helsing fully transforms into a werewolf and confronts Dracula, who reveals his true demonic form, a bat-like, winged creature with ancient powers. Small orange diamond dramatic irony. Van Helsing, a sworn monster hunter, must embrace monstrosity to defeat the ultimate evil. Van Helsing vs. Dracula. The battle is primal and symbolic, a beast versus demon, instinct versus calculated evil. Van Helsing kills Dracula, ending the vampire bloodline. Simultaneously, Dracula's thousands of offspring explode, ending his legacy. But the price is high. Anna dies, killed during the chaos. Medium black circle ACT5. Resolution, redemption through loss. In the aftermath, Van Helsing cremates Anna and has a vision of her soul ascending to heaven with her family. Frankenstein's monster sails away, quoting Psalms, "Do not be afraid. I am with you." Van Helsing, now aware of his dark past and the weight of his actions, rides into the sunset, haunted but redeemed. Small Blue Diamond endnote. The story ends not with celebration, but a quiet acceptance of pain and duty. There's no clear resolution to Van Helsing's identity or fate, keeping his mythos open-ended. Performing arts emotional and thematic analysis. Redemption and sin. Van Helsing seeks absolution for sins he can't even remember, representing a man caught between holy duty and personal morality. Identity and duality. Both Van Helsing and the Frankenstein monster represent duality. Man versus monster, soul versus machine, violence versus conscience. Fate versus free will. Anna is driven by family legacy, Van Helsing by divine orders. Yet both choose to challenge fate, even at the cost of their lives. Tragedy and humanity. The most human characters are often the most misunderstood, like the monster. Meanwhile, Dracula, a once human prince, has become a cold manipulator, stripped of all empathy. End with left arrow above conclusion. Van Helsing, 2004, is a genre-blending adventure with a traditional yet richly layered narrative. While it sometimes sacrifices character development for visual spectacle, its emotional undertones, mythological fusion, and epic pacing make it a unique cinematic experience. The plot may follow a classic format, but it amplifies it with grand ambition, operatic stakes, and Gothic flair. Van Helsing, 2004, character development analysis, in great detail. Van Helsing, 2004, is not primarily a character-driven film, it's a visually extravagant action-horror adventure, but within its Gothic spectacle lie several key characters who embody archetypal roles and undergo meaningful transformation. While some characters are more symbolic or thematic than deeply psychological, there are clear arcs of personal growth, internal conflict, and redemption that drive the story forward. #Gabriel Van Helsing, played by Hugh Jackman. The mystery of identity and redemption arc. Van Helsing is introduced as a brooding, haunted monster hunter, employed by a secret Vatican organization. From the outset, he is plagued by amnesia and dreams of violence he does not remember committing. This internal conflict makes him more than a one-dimensional action hero. He is a man in search of his own past, morally conflicted by his duty to kill creatures who may be more complex than they seem. He is caught in a paradox of righteousness versus monstrosity. Though working for a holy institution, he himself is feared and labeled as a murderer in many lands. This tension becomes more prominent when he encounters Frankenstein's monster, who challenges his binary worldview of good and evil. Wolf-face transformation and self-realization. The turning point in Van Helsing's arc is his infection with lycanthropy. The werewolf curse threatens to strip him of humanity, but in embracing the beast within, he gains the power to defeat Dracula. This moment is symbolic. He must become the monster to kill the ultimate monster, echoing the narrative idea that redemption often comes through darkness. By the end of the film, he has not only completed his mission but also discovered humility, empathy, and moral nuance, especially in how he treats Frankenstein's monster and mourns Anna. His arc concludes in quiet reflection, no longer just a hunter, but a man transformed by pain, sacrifice, and moral awakening. Princess Anna Valerious, played by Kate Beckinsale. Cross swords hash the warrior princess driven by legacy. Anna Valerious is presented as a fierce, strong-willed protector of her family's ancient oath, to kill Dracula and ensure the Valerious family souls can reach heaven. Her motivations are rooted in ancestral duty, pride, and justice. She is the emotional core of the human struggle in the film. Though Anna begins as a hardened warrior, her dynamic with Van Helsing softens her. Through their alliance, she transitions from distrust to affection. She begins to see beyond monsters and legends and learns to value individual morality over inherited prejudice. Tragic heroine arc. Anna's arc is ultimately tragic. She loses her brother Velkan to Dracula's werewolf curse, but she never wavers in her duty. Her death in the climax, accidental but heroic, cements her as a martyr for her cause. In death, she achieves what generations of her family could not: Dracula's destruction and her family's spiritual redemption. While her role may initially seem archetypal, Anna's consistent courage, emotional vulnerability, and fierce loyalty make her a well-rounded character, especially within the context of a fast-paced action film. #Count Vladislaus Dracula, played by Richard Roxburgh. The theatrical villain with hints of pathos. Dracula in Van Helsing is a flamboyant, cold, and cunning antagonist. Though heavily stylized, he is not without layers. Once a man who made a pact for immortality, he is now a soulless being, cursed with eternal life and a chilling detachment from human suffering. His motivations are grand yet personal. He wants to resurrect his children, not for love, but to prove his power and legacy. This need for legacy reflects a twisted version of fatherhood, making him a dark mirror of Frankenstein and Van Helsing. Dracula's charisma, control over his brides, and ability to manipulate make him a captivating villain, even if not deeply humanized. His foil relationship with Van Helsing is central to the film, two immortals battling over the definition of monstrosity. Frankenstein's monster, played by Shula Hensley. Red Heart # the unexpected moral compass. Frankenstein's monster is arguably the most emotionally resonant character in the film. Despite being labeled a monster by the world, he is articulate, gentle, spiritual, and capable of deep empathy. He quotes scripture, shows respect for life, and mourns his creator. His arc challenges the idea that appearance or origin defines morality. He is the emotional heart of the story. His desire not to be used as a tool in Dracula's experiment, and his fear of destruction, inject real pathos into a film otherwise driven by action. Small Blue Diamond key development. His relationship with Van Helsing evolves from one of mistrust to mutual respect. In saving Frankenstein's monster instead of killing him, Van Helsing proves his own growth, recognizing the value of life even in unexpected forms. #Carl the Friar, played by David Wenham. Comic relief with a purpose. Carl begins as the obligatory comic sidekick, awkward, talkative, and bookish. But he evolves into an indispensable asset. He provides key scientific gadgets, discovers the vampire birthing secret, and even saves Anna's life at one point. More importantly, Carl undergoes subtle emotional growth. He goes from hesitant observer to active participant in the war against Dracula. He represents the common man's courage, someone untrained for battle, yet rising to the occasion. #The Brides of Dracula. Kiss mark symbolic figures more than characters. Dracula's three brides, Aelira, Verona, and Marischka, are presented as extensions of his will. They embody temptation, seduction, and chaos. Each has a distinct personality, but none undergo true development. However, their presence enhances the mythical and erotic elements of the story, and their deaths mark key plot progressions. Aelira, in particular, has a more defined rivalry with Anna, culminating in a climactic confrontation. Her jealousy, cruelty, and devotion to Dracula add layers of dark allure to the film's horror fantasy tone. Wolf-face Velkan Valerious. Poor Prince tragedy of the cursed brother. Velkan, Anna's brother, is a noble character whose transformation into a werewolf adds emotional stakes. His arc is brief but tragic. Once a loyal warrior, he is cursed to become the very thing he hunted. His internal torment is evident, especially in his moments of clarity before fully succumbing to the curse. Velkan's fall enhances the emotional urgency for Anna and reinforces the film's themes of fate, transformation, and lost humanity. Conclusion. While Van Helsing, 2004, prioritizes action and atmosphere over deep psychological introspection, its characters are not shallow. Many of them, especially Van Helsing, Anna, and Frankenstein's monster, undergo meaningful growth, shaped by internal conflict, duty, loss, and moral awakening. The film uses these arcs to explore timeless themes. What defines a monster, appearance or action? Is redemption possible without memory or past? Can faith, science, and violence coexist in the fight against evil? Ultimately, the characters give emotional grounding to a story otherwise dominated by spectacle. Their relationships and transformations not only shape the narrative but give it lasting impact beyond its action set pieces. Van Helsing, 2004, In-Depth Character Development Analysis. Trident Emblem Gabriel Van Helsing, Hugh Jackman. The Monster Who Hunts Monsters. Large Blue Diamond Core Conflict. Van Helsing begins the film as a man without a past. He is a holy assassin for the Vatican Secret Order, a grim Reaper-like figure whose name alone evokes fear, even in those he saves. His primary inner conflict is identity. Who is he, and what has he done? He is haunted by fragmented dreams of a violent crime, possibly a murder in the name of the church, and is branded a criminal in countries where he's hunted monsters. This makes him morally ambiguous and tormented, far more than a generic action hero. Large Blue Diamond Transformation and Growth. Van Helsing's journey is about transcending binary morality, the idea that all monsters are evil and all humans are good. His arc bends when he encounters Frankenstein's monster, a creature the Vatican ordered him to destroy. Instead of blindly following orders, he begins to see shades of grey, recognizing the humanity in so-called monsters. When bitten by a werewolf, he is literally transformed into the thing he most fears, a beast. But the twist is poetic. Only a werewolf can kill Dracula, according to the film's ancient prophecy. Thus, his final transformation is both his curse and his salvation. Large Blue Diamond Symbolism. Biblical archetype, he is named Gabriel, like the archangel. He wields holy weapons and brings both wrath and mercy. Redemption arc, his refusal to kill Frankenstein's monster and his grief over Anna's death prove his moral evolution. Christ-like figure, he suffers, sacrifices, and is ultimately alone, haunted but purified. Crown Anna Valerious, Kate Beckinsale. The warrior cursed by legacy. Large Blue Diamond Motivation and Duty. Anna is the final living member of the Valerious family, sworn to kill Dracula or be damned eternally. She is the embodiment of honor, lineage, and tragic destiny. Raised for battle, she's both a protector of her people and a prisoner of her family's curse. Large Blue Diamond Personality Development. Initially, Anna is skeptical of Van Helsing, seeing him as a reckless outsider. But as they fight side by side, mutual respect and subtle romantic tension develops. Unlike Van Helsing, Anna is not lost or searching. She knows exactly who she is, but it's the weight of that knowledge that makes her arc tragic. Her most emotional moments come not in action scenes, but in quiet scenes of reflection, especially regarding her brother Velkan and the futility of centuries of bloodshed. Large Blue Diamond Climactic Sacrifice. Anna's death, though tragic, is narratively satisfying. She dies just as her family is redeemed, finally ending the Valerious curse. Her soul ascends to heaven, symbolizing release from generational trauma. Large Blue Diamond Symbolism. Virgin Warrior, she mirrors Joan of Arc, a chaste warrior blessed and cursed by divine purpose. Tragic heroine, like Ophelia or Eurydice, she dies not from weakness, but from the fate of her bloodline. Catalyst for change, her interactions force Van Helsing to confront his own morality and compassion. #Count Vladislaus Dracula, Richard Roxburgh. The charismatic devourer of life. Large Blue Diamond Psychological Profile. Dracula is portrayed not as a seducer, but as a melodramatic narcissist, obsessed with legacy. He is cold, strategic, and devoid of true emotion, even toward his brides. He views life and death as tools, not moral concepts. He refers to himself as being dead, not undead, highlighting his spiritual emptiness. Though charming and articulate, he is irredeemable, a foil to Van Helsing's moral questioning. Large Blue Diamond Motivation. His primary goal is to give life to his thousands of offspring, who remain lifeless without Frankenstein's technology. But his desire is not fatherly, it's a perverse hunger to be God, to create life not for love, but for domination. Large Blue Diamond Conflict with Van Helsing. Dracula and Van Helsing are two sides of the same coin, both immortal, both killers, both living in the shadow of ancient oaths. But where Van Helsing seeks purpose and redemption, Dracula embraces power and control. Their final battle is metaphysical, a fight between the damned and the possibly redeemable. Large Blue Diamond Symbolism. Antichrist figure, attempts to create life unnaturally, mocking divine order. Fallen angel, once human, now monstrous, stripped of soul and empathy. Legacy distorted, where Anna's family wants salvation, Dracula wants replication of death. # Frankenstein's monster, Schuler Hensley. The soul hidden in flesh. Large blue diamond humanity through monstrosity. Frankenstein's monster is the most emotionally intelligent character in the film. While feared and hunted, he displays compassion, grief, and religious devotion. He quotes scripture, weeps over his creator, and pleads for his life. He forces Van Helsing to confront the flaws in institutional morality. The Vatican sees him as an abomination, yet he proves himself more human than many humans. Large blue diamond arc and emotional weight. He begins as an object of pursuit but becomes a moral anchor. By refusing to be used by Dracula, and later by assisting Van Helsing, he reclaims agency. His final act, drifting off in a boat while quoting the Bible, leaves the audience with a sense of grace, elevating him to the status of a misunderstood saint. Large blue diamond symbolism. Rejected son, echoes Christ's rejection by society. Living conscience, forces the protagonist to re-evaluate what makes someone worthy of life. Sacrificial innocence, he has no family, no place, yet he is the most noble of them all. Carl the Friar, David Wenham. The comic mind with a brave heart. Large blue diamond archetype. Carl fills the gadget guy / reluctant hero archetype, similar to Q in James Bond or Jonathan in The Mummy. Initially a non-combatant, he matures into someone willing to risk his life for the greater good. Large blue diamond development. He transitions from bumbling sidekick to essential ally, saving Anna, uncovering Dracula's plan, and building the technological tools Van Helsing relies on. His bravery is unassuming but real. Large blue diamond purpose in the narrative. He brings levity, exposition, and humanity. Carl is the character most like the audience. He reacts with wonder, fear, and logic in a world filled with chaos and legend. # Dracula's brides, Ailira, Verona, Marischka. Large blue diamond function over depth. The three vampire brides are mythic extensions of Dracula. They represent lust, deception, and chaos. Each has a slightly different personality. Ailira is cruel and theatrical, Verona is maternal, Marischka is more beast-like, but they function more as forces of nature than individuals. Their deaths mark plot shifts and emotionally charge Anna's motivations. Ailira, in particular, shares a venomous rivalry with Anna that peaks in their final battle. Large blue diamond symbolism. Feminine corruption, twisted symbols of love and fertility. Sirens of death, they lure, mock, and destroy. Unnatural motherhood, their obsession with resurrecting vampire children perverts the maternal role. Wolf-face Welken Valerious, Will Kemp. The brother lost to the beast. Large blue diamond tragic arc. Welken is Anna's beloved brother, turned into a werewolf during a failed mission. He represents honor lost to corruption. His humanity flickers through the beast, giving Anna's quest urgency and emotional stakes. He doesn't have much screen time, but his presence looms large. His tragic fate adds depth to Anna's motivations and highlights the theme of the beast within. Final character web, how arcs intertwine. Van Helsing's redemption is only possible because of Anna's faith, Frankenstein's grace, and Carl's loyalty. Dracula's downfall is a direct result of his inability to love, in contrast to the sacrifices made by others. The film's emotional climax is not just the death of Dracula, but Anna's death and Van Helsing's silent grief, a moment that humanizes him more than any dialogue. Conclusion. Van Helsing, 2004, though often categorized as a fantasy action spectacle, carries a rich layer of character interplay underneath its blockbuster exterior. The characters function as both mythological archetypes and emotionally resonant figures. Each has a role in balancing the film's themes of redemption versus damnation, humanity versus monstrosity, faith versus science, duty versus identity. In the end, Van Helsing is a character-driven epic disguised as an action film, anchored by internal conflict and complex relationships that give it emotional gravity beyond its Gothic visuals and high-octane pacing. Would you like to continue with a breakdown of character symbolism comparisons with other Gothic films, or perhaps explore dialogue analysis for Van Helsing and Anna? Van Helsing, 2004, Performances Analysis. Directed by Stephen Sommers. Main cast, Hugh Jackman, Kate Beckinsale, Richard Roxburgh, David Wenham, Schuler Hensley. Medium white star Hugh Jackman as Gabriel Van Helsing. The monster hunter haunted by his past. Hugh Jackman, fresh off his breakout role as Wolverine in the X-Men franchise, brings a commanding presence to the titular role of Van Helsing. His performance is a careful balance of physicality, stoicism, and quiet vulnerability. Jackman doesn't overplay Van Helsing's tortured soul. Instead, he lets the weariness and moral conflict simmer beneath the surface. His action scenes are fluid and convincing, bolstered by his athletic frame and experience in action choreography. But it's in the quieter moments, when Van Helsing reflects on his lost past or grieves Anna's death, where Jackman's depth as an actor shines through. He brings a sincere emotional weight to a character that could have easily become a one-note action hero. Small Blue Diamond strengths. Gravitas and screen presence. Subtle emotional range despite the film's operatic tone. Believable moral conflict in a fantasy setting. Small Blue Diamond contribution. Jackman anchors the film with a heroic yet human portrayal, lending credibility and empathy to a fantastical world. Medium white star Kate Beckinsale as Anna Valerious. The tragic warrior princess. Kate Beckinsale delivers one of the film's most emotionally grounded performances. She portrays Anna Valerious not just as a sword-wielding heroine, but as a woman burdened by centuries of family duty and loss. Her Eastern European accent, though occasionally theatrical, supports the fantasy tone and doesn't undercut the sincerity of her portrayal. What stands out in Beckinsale's performance is her ability to balance stoicism with subtle vulnerability. She never reduces Anna to a damsel or a caricature. In action scenes, she's commanding and physically convincing. In dramatic moments, particularly those involving her brother Velkan or Van Helsing, she shows a deep emotional core. Her chemistry with Hugh Jackman is understated but authentic, built on shared sorrow, mutual respect, and unspoken affection. Their final scenes together are especially poignant, with Beckinsale delivering a performance that adds tragic nobility to Anna's character. Small Blue Diamond strengths. Emotional intensity beneath the warrior persona. Convincing action execution. Natural chemistry with Jackman. Small Blue Diamond contribution. Beckinsale brings emotional legitimacy and narrative heart to the film, grounding its operatic elements in human grief and honor. Medium white star Richard Roxburgh as Count Dracula. The Gothic showman. Richard Roxburgh's Dracula is a bold, theatrical, and highly stylized performance. He portrays the Count not as a brooding, sensual vampire in the traditional sense, but as a grandiose, egocentric aristocrat, part Shakespearean villain, part operatic demon. While some may consider his performance over the top, it fits the tonal ambition of the film, which leans heavily into Gothic melodrama. Roxburgh's physical mannerisms, voice modulation, and sharp-eyed stares lend Dracula a predatory elegance, making him unsettling and magnetic in every scene. He excels in balancing arrogant cruelty with chilling calm, particularly in scenes with Frankenstein's monster or his brides. Even in silence, he conveys menace. What elevates his performance is the sense of internal coldness. Dracula is not just evil, he is void of empathy, which Roxburgh channels with icy precision. Small Blue Diamond strengths. Charisma and theatrical flair. Effective use of facial expressions and movement. Balance of elegance and menace. Contribution. Roxburgh delivers a memorably sinister antagonist, one that embodies the film's mythic scale and enhances the stakes for the heroes. Medium white star Shula Hensley as Frankenstein's monster. The soulful creature. Arguably the most affecting performance in the film, Shula Hensley brings unexpected nuance to Frankenstein's monster. Known primarily as a Broadway performer, Hensley brings a Shakespearean gravitas and operatic emotion to the role, distinguishing the creature as not just a misunderstood monster but a philosophical being. Behind heavy prosthetics and elaborate costume design, Hensley's voice, eyes, and physical stillness convey deep sorrow and internal conflict. His delivery of biblical lines, expressions of grief over Dr. Frankenstein, and plea for his own life add a moral gravity that elevates the film's emotional resonance. Rather than being a tool or background figure, his performance ensures the monster becomes a symbol of humanity and empathy, a stark contrast to Dracula's soullessness. Small Blue Diamond strengths. Emotional expression through limited physicality. Gravitas and vocal presence. Deep empathy and tragic intelligence. Small Blue Diamond contribution. Hensley delivers the film's most subtle and emotionally layered performance, grounding its mythology in real pathos. Medium white star David Wenham as Carl the Friar. The comic brain with unexpected bravery. David Wenham infuses Carl with charm, wit, and an undercurrent of courage. As the film's comic relief, he balances humor with utility, providing exposition, gadgets, and moments of levity. But Wenham avoids turning Carl into a parody or buffoon. Instead, he plays him as a scholarly, reluctant hero who grows into his bravery over time. Wenham's line delivery is clever and sharp, and his timing supports the fast pacing of the film. In key scenes, like discovering Dracula's scientific lab or risking his life to help Anna, He shows a seriousness and sincerity that make Carl more than a sidekick. Small Blue Diamond strengths. Natural comedic timing. Subtle emotional growth. Chemistry with lead characters. Small Blue Diamond contribution. Wenham's performance brings accessibility and human relatability to a world of monsters and legends, lightening the tone without undermining tension. Medium white star # supporting cast, Brides and Velkin. Elena Anaya, Sylvia Colocca, Josie Moran as Dracula's brides. Each of Dracula's brides delivers a stylized performance rooted in theatrical villainy and sensual menace. Their performances are physical, expressive, and consistent with the film's operatic tone. While they don't have deep arcs, the actresses give the characters distinct personalities. Ailira, Anaya, is the most dramatic and aggressive. Verona, Colocca, plays the cool seductress. Mariska, Moran, is animalistic and primal. Their vocal work, body language, and facial intensity enhance the horror fantasy atmosphere. Will Kemp as Velkin Valerious. Velkin's screen time is limited, but Kemp gives a genuinely tragic performance as Anna's cursed brother. He conveys nobility before the transformation and haunting torment after becoming a werewolf. His scenes, especially his struggle to remain human, add emotional urgency to Anna's arc. Clapperboard final evaluation, ensemble impact. Despite being an action-heavy fantasy film, Van Helsing, 2004, benefits immensely from a cast that leans into the theatrical and emotional demands of the story. The performances, especially by Jackman, Beckinsale, and Hensley, give the film its emotional legitimacy, grounding its extravagant visuals in believable emotion. Even performances that lean toward melodrama, Roxburgh's Dracula, The Brides, do so in service of the film's heightened Gothic tone. Every actor commits fully to their role, whether tragic, noble, or diabolical, and this commitment is what elevates Van Helsing beyond surface spectacle. Conclusion. Van Helsing, 2004, thrives not just because of its visual effects or mythical storytelling, but because of a cast that embraces the theatrical scale of its universe. Each performer, from leads to supporting characters, contributes emotionally, thematically, and stylistically to a film that walks the line between pulp action and operatic tragedy. The result is a film that, despite mixed critical reception, delivers memorable character portrayals and iconic performances that continue to resonate with genre fans. Would you like a ranking of the performances or perhaps a comparison of Hugh Jackman's Van Helsing to similar Gothic heroes like Brendan Fraser's Rick O'Connell or Keanu Reeves in Bram Stoker's Dracula? Van Helsing, 2004, Direction Analysis. Directed by Stephen Sommers. Asterisk also known for The Mummy, 1999, The Mummy Returns, 2001. Film # overall vision and narrative tone. Stephen Sommers approaches Van Helsing, 2004, with a grand ambition of crafting a cinematic love letter to classic Universal monster movies, fusing their legacy with modern blockbuster sensibilities. His direction aims for operatic scale, Gothic extravagance, and pulpy energy, resulting in a movie that thrives on momentum, spectacle, and mythological density. Sommers crafts a world where legendary monsters, Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, werewolves, coexist in an alternate 19th century Europe filled with cathedrals, castles, crypts, and secret societies. His vision is unapologetically theatrical, embracing the melodrama and stylization inherent in classic horror fantasy storytelling. Rather than attempting to modernize or tone down these mythologies, Sommers amplifies their dramatic intensity, often leaning into hyperbolic character moments, sweeping visual cues, and moral dualities, light versus dark, faith versus damnation. Artist palette, tone, and mood. The tone is set within the first 5 minutes, a black-and-white prologue paying homage to James Whale's Frankenstein, 1931. This sequence establishes a film steeped in Gothic atmosphere, religious iconography, and high-stakes storytelling. Throughout, Sommers maintains a consistent tone, dark, mythic, yet adventurous. He blends horror and fantasy with action-adventure, ensuring that the mood never becomes overwhelmingly grim despite the subject matter. Instead, it often flirts with dark romanticism and mythological grandeur, drawing inspiration from Hammer horror films and Victorian pulp fiction. The tone is enhanced by stormy, chiaroscuro lighting in Transylvania, dramatic musical cues by Alan Silvestri, heroic posturing and tragic sacrifices, a strong moral universe, clear definitions of good, evil, and redemption, movie camera stylistic choices and visual composition. Sommers' directorial style in Van Helsing is kinetic, digitally ambitious, and theatrical, echoing the aesthetics of early 2000s fantasy cinema while channeling classic horror imagery. Notable stylistic choices include Hyper-stylized action sequences. Characters frequently leap, spin, and grapple mid-air, often in bullet time-like choreography. Gothic production design. Every set, from Dracula's icy fortress to Frankenstein's windmill lab, is exaggerated and intricately detailed, enhancing the film's mythical aura. CG-heavy creature design. Sommers heavily integrates CGI to animate the werewolves, Dracula's transformations, and his bride's airborne attacks. While dated by today's standards, it reflected cutting-edge ambition at the time. Shot composition. Sommers favors sweeping crane shots, symmetrical framing, and fast-cut editing. While critics argued the pacing and cuts were too relentless, this visual style complements the film's constant motion and breathless energy. He often uses close-ups during emotional beats, such as Anna's death or Van Helsing's internal struggles, juxtaposed with wide, panoramic vistas to portray the epic scale of conflict. Stopwatch hash pacing and storytelling rhythm. One of the most defining and divisive aspects of Sommers's direction is the fast-paced, almost non-stop progression of action and exposition. The film rarely pauses for reflection, instead favoring momentum. This results in a tone that is urgent and relentless, which some viewers find thrilling and others overwhelming. Despite its near 2-hour runtime, the pacing is kept tight through. Rapid narrative transitions. Rome, Paris, Transylvania. Frequent monster battles. Layered reveals about Van Helsing's past, Dracula's origin, and monster lore. Sommers ensures that the film never lingers long in a single emotional or narrative space. This maintains excitement but comes at the cost of deeper character introspection or atmospheric build-up. Performing arts balance of genres and narrative cohesion. Stephen Sommers boldly fuses genres, action-adventure, horror, fantasy, tragedy, and even light comedy, via Karl the Friar. The challenge of balancing these disparate tones is immense, and while not always seamless, his direction makes clear that this fusion is intentional. He often uses genre archetypes and camp, hero versus evil lord, the tragic princess, the misunderstood monster, as tools of thematic storytelling, not just clichés. His homage to multiple mythologies makes Van Helsing feel like a cinematic mashup, and he directs with a confident awareness of that scope. That said, the sheer ambition sometimes leads to tonal clashes, especially when attempting to blend sorrowful moments, Anna's death, Frankenstein's pleas, with comic relief or kinetic monster fights. Musical note. Director's synergy with music and editing. Stephen Sommers' collaboration with composer Alan Silvestri is one of the film's strongest directorial choices. Silvestri's sweeping orchestral score mirrors the grandiose vision Sommers crafts with his camera, whether in moments of tragic romance or climactic monster battles. Sommers also uses editing rhythm to match musical cues, particularly during large-scale set pieces, which creates a fluid audiovisual experience. While modern audiences may find some transitions abrupt or overstimulating, at the time, this energetic pacing gave Van Helsing a blockbuster pulse that aligned with contemporary action films like Pirates of the Caribbean or the Matrix sequels. Visionary risks and directorial identity. Stephen Sommers takes massive creative swings in Van Helsing, attempting to launch a monster cinematic universe before such terms were in vogue. His direction is fearless, even if messy, and distinctly personal. He directs with an infectious enthusiasm for myth, monsters, and pulp adventure, which permeates every frame. He doesn't shy away from theatricality, and while some may see this as overindulgent, it also gives the film a singular stylistic identity. Few directors could blend Frankenstein, Dracula, werewolves, and religious allegory into a single narrative with this level of confidence and coherence, even if it's not always perfectly executed. Conclusion. The directorial legacy of Van Helsing. Stephen Sommers directs Van Helsing like a filmmaker caught in a thunderstorm of Gothic imagination, bold, thunderous, and unafraid to take stylistic risks. His direction shapes the film into a Gothic action opera, filled with haunted legacies, eternal monsters, and mythic symbolism. Though the film received mixed reviews on release, its cult following today stems largely from Sommers' distinct creative voice, one that embraced spectacle without irony and dared to build a fully committed cinematic monsterverse. His direction isn't just about flashy visuals, it's about honoring classic monster cinema through modern blockbuster language. And in that sense, Van Helsing remains a uniquely ambitious and passionately directed film within early 2000 genre cinema. Would you like a breakdown of how Sommers' Van Helsing compares to his The Mummy films in terms of direction and tone? Stephen Sommers' directorial identity in Van Helsing. Stephen Sommers is a director known for his bombastic style, reverence for pulp fiction, and love of large-scale storytelling. With Van Helsing, he didn't simply aim to create a traditional action horror film. Instead, he sought to reinvent a cinematic universe that merged Gothic monsters with Indiana Jones-style spectacle. His signature is all over the film: high adrenaline action, exaggerated stakes, operatic visuals, and characters torn between moral codes and monstrous legacies. This project reflects his passion not just for storytelling, but for world-building on a mythological scale. Fire tone management, between Gothic horror and blockbuster adventure. Directing Van Helsing required a careful tonal balance between horror, action, and emotional drama, a task Sommers approaches with bold, sometimes reckless, energy. Performing art's key tonal threads he juggles. Mythic seriousness, the weight of Dracula's curse, Van Helsing's amnesia, and Anna's family legacy inject gravitas. Heightened camp, Dracula's flamboyance, Karl's one-liners, and over-the-top creature battles give the film a pulpy, comic book feel. Emotional tragedy, Frankenstein's monster's loneliness and Anna's death are directed with sincerity, adding emotional depth. While the tonal transitions may feel abrupt to some viewers, Sommers directs with the intent of creating an old-school monster adventure that isn't afraid of extremes. He embraces melodrama instead of toning it down. Movie camera, advanced visual storytelling, and cinematic language. European castle production design as narrative tool. Sommers utilizes the visual space not just to impress, but to reinforce theme and mythology. The Vatican's clean, symmetrical interiors reflect order, righteousness, and secrets, symbolizing Van Helsing's confusing loyalty to the church. Transylvania's crumbling castles and blood-drenched sky echo chaos, decay, and Dracula's dominion over unnatural life. Dracula's icy lair is a visual metaphor for his emotional emptiness and undead coldness. Left-pointing magnifying glass symbolism in shot composition. Sommers frequently frames characters with stained glass or crosses in the background, emphasizing divine judgment or spiritual burden. Van Helsing is often placed at the center of symmetrical shots, suggesting his internal conflict between good and evil, almost as if the universe is watching him. Use of mirrors and reflections during Dracula scenes underlines themes of hidden truth, illusion, and duality. Stopwatch narrative rhythm, escalation, and directorial control of pacing. Sommers demonstrates a strong command over narrative escalation, ensuring that each act of the film raises the stakes. Act 1 introduces mystery, Van Helsing's past, danger, Mr. Hyde in Paris, and the quest, Anna's mission. Act 2 escalates with Frankenstein's monster, Dracula's baby army, and emotional sacrifices. Act 3 delivers the climax, a werewolf fight in Dracula's castle, Van Helsing's transformation, and Anna's fate. Though the pacing is unrelenting, Sommers structures the chaos with deliberate set-piece milestones that keep the audience oriented. His direction ensures that even in its loudest, busiest scenes, the story keeps moving forward. #Director's handling of horror elements. Sommers treats horror with stylized reverence, leaning on aesthetics more than shock. He avoids gore and instead emphasizes theatrical terror, like brides flying with shrieks or Dracula emerging upside down like a bat. Lighting plays a crucial role, flickering torchlight in crypts, stormy skies during confrontations, and cold moonlight for tension. While not scary in the traditional horror sense, his direction gives Van Helsing a mythic dread, invoking the atmosphere of classic Hammer films and Universal horror. Emotional and philosophical undertones, a director's spiritual stamp. Sommers subtly weaves philosophical and spiritual themes into the film. Van Helsing's battle isn't just with Dracula, but with his own cursed identity. Sommers directs his internal struggle with restraint, soft glances, hesitant speech, and silence during major reveals. Frankenstein's monster, despite limited screen time, is directed as the film's moral heart. Sommers lingers on his prayers, cries for mercy, and philosophical monologues, emphasizing the theme that true monstrosity lies not in one's form but in one's soul. By doing this, Sommers elevates Van Helsing beyond mere monster mash. It becomes a story about redemption, identity, and moral legacy, even if buried beneath flashy action. Director's use of technology and limitations. Sommers pushes the limits of 2004-era CGI with shape-shifting vampires, werewolf transformations, baby vampire armies, dynamic Paris rooftop chase sequences. While the CGI hasn't aged perfectly, his direction uses it creatively. Dracula's transformations mirror his volatile emotions. The timing of effects during battles adds rhythm, slowdowns during key hits, speed bursts during escapes. Critics at the time noted that some visuals were overwhelming, but in retrospect, Sommers' boldness is clear. He treated Van Helsing like a cinematic experiment in Gothic spectacle. Directorial risks and long-term impact. Stephen Sommers took huge creative gambles, mixing genres, horror, adventure, steampunk, myth, and religion, merging public domain monsters into a new mythology. telling a fast-paced, emotionally rich tale in under 2.5 hours. While Van Helsing didn't become a franchise, the ambitious DNA of his direction laid groundwork for future dark universe attempts by studios like Universal. His film inspired a generation of Gothic action hybrids: Underworld, The Brothers Grimm, Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter, none of which achieved Van Helsing's exact blend of theatricality and scale. Bullseye final thoughts on Stephen Sommers' direction. Stephen Sommers directs Van Helsing as a love letter to monster lore, filtered through an action fantasy blockbuster lens. His approach is cinematically ambitious, thematically rich, stylistically bold, emotionally sincere, despite the chaos. In a world that often demands restraint and realism, Van Helsing stands as a rare film where the director chose myth over minimalism, and in doing so, created a timeless cult classic. Let me know if you'd like a visual breakdown of key scenes from a director's lens, or a side-by-side comparison of Sommers' techniques in The Mummy, 1999, versus Van Helsing, 2004, visual identity of Van Helsing, 2004. Van Helsing isn't just an action horror film, it's a visual spectacle deeply rooted in Gothic romanticism, mythological fantasy, and classic horror imagery. The cinematography plays a central role in realizing director Stephen Sommers' ambitious vision, using lighting, framing, and movement to build a mysterious, suspenseful, and often breathtaking cinematic world. New moon symbol lighting, Gothic contrast and emotional weight. Full moon symbol 1. Low-key lighting and shadows. Debut employs chiaroscuro lighting throughout the film, deep shadows and high contrasts that echo classic Universal monster movies. This technique creates a sense of dread in catacombs, castles, and forests. Enhances the monstrous elements of Dracula and his brides by placing them partially in shadow or lit with unnatural light. Keeps the world in a constant state of twilight, emphasizing the idea that light, good, and dark, evil, are always battling. For example, Dracula's lair is consistently bathed in cold, blue-grey tones, symbolizing death and emotional sterility. Van Helsing's scenes in the Vatican feature warmer candlelight, evoking spiritual purity and ancient tradition. Electric light bulb 2. Color temperature and symbolism. Cool tones, icy blues, steel greys, dominate the scenes involving monsters and supernatural danger. Warm tones, golds, browns, and torchlight, appear in moments of human connection, such as Anna and Van Helsing's growing bond. Flashy, electric blue lightning used during Frankenstein's resurrection scenes visually connects to classic horror roots and symbolizes unnatural life. This deliberate color contrast reflects the inner worlds of the characters, cold death versus warm humanity. Bullseye framing and composition, mythic scale and intimacy. Clapperboard 1. Epic wide shots. Debut frequently uses sweeping wide shots to highlight the mythological grandeur of the world. The Transylvanian landscape is framed with towering mountains, stormy skies, and fog-choked forests, setting a bleak tone of isolation and foreboding. Dracula's castle is almost always seen from below or at a great distance, making it look vast, unreachable, and threatening, like a fortress of hell. These compositions emphasize the David versus Goliath dynamic between Van Helsing and the dark forces he faces. 2. Layered deep focus. Many frames include foreground, midground, and background elements in sharp focus. This technique deepens the visual texture and gives the world a lived-in, immersive feel. It allows multiple things to happen in a single frame, e.g., Dracula's brides attacking while villagers flee in the background, and Van Helsing reloading in the midground. Handshake 3. Close-ups and emotional isolation. Though the film is heavy on action, Debut balances it with intimate close-ups during emotional scenes. Van Helsing's moral conflict is captured in brooding, dimly lit close-ups. Frankenstein's monster's expressions of sorrow and fear are highlighted through tight, respectful framing, emphasizing his humanity. This visual empathy helps ground the fantastical narrative with human emotion. Roller coaster camera movement and kinetic energy. Cross swords #1. Dynamic tracking and crane shots. Debut uses long, fluid tracking shots in battle sequences to maintain momentum and keep geography clear during chaos. Move between characters, giving a panoramic feel of interconnected action. In the vampire bride attack scene, for example, the camera swoops with the flying brides, swings through the village, and returns to Van Helsing mid-fight, all in an unbroken shot. This cinematic ballet creates rhythmic excitement and keeps viewers visually engaged. Wolf Face 2. Whip pans and quick cuts. Used heavily during werewolf transformations and rapid attacks. These fast movements reflect the unpredictability and ferocity of the monsters. Debut matches pacing with narrative stakes, more stable and poetic in dramatic moments, and chaotic and disorienting in battles. Milky Way visually striking moments. Opening monochrome sequence, homage to Universal monsters. Filmed in black and white with grainy texture. Evokes Frankenstein, 1931, and other classic horror films. Uses candlelight and silhouette to introduce the monster with reverence and mystery. The Vatican Armory scene. Lit with overhead yellow lanterns that cast holy warmth. Composition mimics a cathedral, Van Helsing as a warrior monk blessed with tools of war. The ballroom masquerade scene. Dracula's vampire ball is lit with deep reds and golds, sumptuous and sensual, yet filled with dread. Mirrors and shadows amplify the hidden horror behind the beauty. Final battle in Dracula's castle. Heavy backlighting gives the scene a mythic, almost celestial glow. Van Helsing and Dracula are silhouetted against stained glass windows and moonlight, turning the scene into an operatic showdown. Cinematography as storytelling tool. The cinematography doesn't just look good, it enhances the narrative's core themes. Isolation. Characters are often framed alone against vast landscapes, emphasizing their emotional burden. Legacy and faith. Crosses, churches, and relics are embedded into the frame to suggest constant spiritual judgment. Duality. Shadows and reflections constantly remind the audience of internal and external conflict, what's human, what's monstrous. Film conclusion. A painterly, operatic visual journey. Alan Daview's cinematography in Van Helsing transforms the film from a typical monster flick into a Gothic fantasy opera. His use of light and shadow, ambitious camera movement, color design, and mythic framing help define the movie's unique atmosphere. Despite critiques of overuse of CGI or action saturation, the visual identity remains rich, distinct, and thematically charged. In a film where monsters and men battle not only each other but their inner demons, the cinematography provides a crucial emotional anchor, illuminating a dark world with both horror and heart. Would you like this broken down into a YouTube-friendly script format, or would you prefer side-by-side comparisons with similar genre films like Underworld or Bram Stoker's Dracula? Van Helsing, 2004, Editing and Pacing Analysis. In Van Helsing, director Stephen Sommers collaborates with editor Bob Duxay, his frequent creative partner, to craft a film with breakneck momentum, stylized transitions, and a pulse-pounding rhythm. The film's editing plays a critical role in delivering its epic scope, action-heavy sequences, and multi-genre tone, blending horror, fantasy, and adventure into a unified narrative. Stopwatch overall pacing, high speed from start to finish. From the opening moments, Van Helsing establishes an accelerated narrative tempo that rarely slows. The film opens with a black-and-white prologue, a stylish tribute to classic Universal monster movies, and immediately propels viewers into a fast-paced hunt involving Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, and torch-wielding mobs. Throughout its 2-hour runtime, the film rarely lingers on quiet moments. Instead, it prioritizes non-stop momentum, often leaping quickly from one major event to the next. Van Helsing's Vatican mission briefing, Transylvanian vampire battle, werewolf subplot, Frankenstein's resurrection, final Dracula showdown. This compressed structure is designed to keep the viewer constantly engaged, though it sometimes comes at the expense of emotional depth and narrative clarity. Repeat button scene transitions and continuity. Gear seamless and thematic cuts. Bob Duxay uses quick, stylish transitions to maintain flow between scenes that span across vastly different locations and tones. Examples include match cuts and wipes from the Vatican to Transylvania, allowing a globe-trotting feel reminiscent of pulp adventures like Indiana Jones. Time-lapses and montage sequences to compress exposition and background information without dragging the pace. Camera with flash visual and action continuity. Action scenes are cut with clarity, particularly impressive given the complexity of some set pieces, e.g., vampire brides flying through villages. Duxay ensures viewers maintain spatial awareness by using consistent shot-reverse shot angles and keeping eye lines and geography intact, even during rapid editing. This is especially important in supernatural battles where CGI creatures interact with human characters. Editing provides the cohesion needed to sell these sequences as believable. Performing arts balancing action and character moments. One of the biggest challenges in Van Helsing's editing is balancing emotional beats with relentless action pacing. Thumbs up sign where it works. Duxay carves out brief pauses between action scenes to explore Van Helsing's guilt, Anna's family curse, or Frankenstein's internal pain. For instance, a moment of reflection near a campfire or a dialogue-heavy walk through ruins often acts as a temporary breath before the next monster attack. Thumbs down sign where it struggles. Character arcs often feel rushed or underdeveloped because the editing rarely lingers on emotional conversations or backstory. Anna's relationship with Van Helsing moves quickly from distrust to alliance to romantic tension, all within a compressed time frame that lacks quiet build-up. This rapid pacing can result in emotional disconnect, where the audience watches impressive visual events unfold but lacks time to process or care deeply about character stakes. Cross swords action editing, rhythm, speed and style. The film's numerous action sequences, fights with vampires, werewolves, and Frankenstein's monster, are cut with a high-frequency rhythm. Fast cuts emphasize the speed and chaos of monster attacks. Slow-motion inserts highlight key heroic moments, e.g., Van Helsing mid-leap with crossbow. Intercutting between multiple locations during the climax, e.g., the werewolf fight above and the vampire birth chamber below, adds scale and tension. This editing style gives the film a comic book-like quality, dynamic, exaggerated, and stylized. However, this approach has polarizing effects. Some viewers may find the relentless pace thrilling and visually exciting. Others may find it exhausting or cluttered, as the lack of variation in rhythm creates sensory fatigue over time. Hourglass with flowing sand, narrative rhythm and emotional impact. The editing in Van Helsing prioritizes external conflict and spectacle over internal transformation. The film's pacing decisions affect its emotional tone in the following ways. Glowing star prose. Keeps younger or action-oriented audiences hooked with fast, engaging storytelling. Matches the pulp adventure tone and Monster Hunter theme, mirroring serial storytelling with minimal downtime. Supports the larger-than-life tone of Gothic horror through epic, cinematic momentum. Cons. Key character arcs, Van Helsing's identity crisis, Anna's family curse, Dracula's lost soul, are underserved by the editing's haste. Major plot revelations, e.g., Van Helsing's true nature, Dracula's immortality, aren't always given the dramatic pause they deserve. In essence, the film moves so fast, it often skips opportunities for weighty emotional payoffs. Film standout edited sequences. The Vampire Bride's village attack. Rapid cutting between villagers, flying vampires, and Van Helsing's crossbow action. Quick reaction shots build panic, while brief slow-motion inserts highlight key kills. Masquerade ball scene. Elegant cross dissolves and long takes shift into frantic cutting when Dracula's brides are revealed. Contrast in rhythm helps sell the shift from elegance to horror. Final showdown between Van Helsing and Dracula. High-intensity intercutting between multiple character fights. Rhythm escalates as the full moon nears, culminating in synchronized transformations and deaths. Clapperboard conclusion. Stylish but relentless editing. In Van Helsing, 2004, Bob Duxay's editing plays a vital role in crafting a visually rich, constantly moving, action horror spectacle. It delivers a rhythm that's consistently thrilling and stylized, aligning perfectly with the film's over-the-top tone and Gothic adventure spirit. However, the same editing style that energizes the narrative also limits its emotional depth. By favoring speed over nuance, the film occasionally sacrifices character intimacy and thematic clarity. That said, for audiences seeking fast-paced thrills, lavish spectacle, and monster mayhem, the editing ensures that there's never a dull moment. Would you like this restructured into a YouTube voiceover script or supported with comparisons to similar films like Underworld or The Mummy, 1999, Van Helsing, 2004, soundtrack and score analysis? The musical score of Van Helsing, 2004, composed by Alan Silvestri, is one of the film's most defining and dynamic components. Known for his work on Back to the Future, Forrest Gump, and The Avengers, Silvestri brings his signature style, grand, thematic, and emotionally resonant, to Van Helsing, elevating the film's Gothic horror adventure tone with a bold, sweeping orchestral soundscape. The score functions as more than mere background music. It is an integral part of the movie's narrative propulsion, emotional resonance, and atmospheric depth. Milky Way atmosphere and world building through music. Silvestri's score constructs a rich oral tapestry that helps establish Van Helsing's unique world, a stylized Gothic Europe filled with monsters, myths, and ancient curses. The main theme, heard early during the opening credits and Van Helsing's arrival in Transylvania, is bombastic, layered with pounding percussion, sharp strings, and ominous brass. This heroic motif becomes a musical identity for Van Helsing himself, dark, brooding, yet filled with a sense of unstoppable momentum and purpose. Through orchestration, the music creates a sound world that balances adventure and horror, a challenging duality given the film's genre blend. The score leans into this dichotomy with menacing minor key tones for Dracula and his brides, heroic brass sections for Van Helsing's action scenes, choir and organ textures for supernatural or sacred moments, particularly within the Vatican or Dracula's icy lair. The score gives each scene atmospheric clarity, guiding the viewer's emotional state, intensifying danger, and reinforcing suspense. Musical score key themes and motifs. Silvestri develops recurring musical motifs tied to characters and narrative threads, giving the soundtrack cohesion across the film's sprawling plot. 1. Van Helsing's heroic theme. A bold, rhythmic signature that often opens or closes action sequences. Fast string ostinatos and layered brass suggest movement, moral conflict, and relentless pursuit. Variations of this theme are used throughout, sometimes subdued in quieter moments to show his inner conflict. 2. Dracula's Gothic theme. A haunting blend of organ, low strings, and eerie choral effects. Often used in scenes set in Dracula's castle or when he manipulates his brides. This motif is melodically simple but harmonically complex, underscoring Dracula's ancient, cursed immortality. 3. Anna Valerious and family curse motif. A more emotional, melancholic string-based theme used in moments of reflection, loss, or family legacy. This helps distinguish Anna's arc and her personal stakes from the larger monster hunting plot. 4. Frankenstein's monster theme. A sorrowful, almost sacred-sounding melody played with strings and choir. It emphasizes the misunderstood nature of the creature, painting him as a tragic figure rather than a monster. These motifs are often layered and combined in scenes involving multiple characters, reinforcing the musical storytelling as tightly integrated with the visual and emotional arcs. Cross-swords score in action sequences. Silvestri is especially skilled in scoring fast-paced, choreographed action, and Van Helsing offers numerous sequences where his music intensifies the thrill. Notable examples. Vampire Bride's Attack, Village Scene. The score escalates with dramatic, ascending chords. The mix of frantic strings and rhythmic percussion mirrors the chaos of the attack. Brass blasts punctuate Van Helsing's counterattacks, syncing with key visual beats. Final showdown with Dracula. The score builds through layers, starting slow and brooding, then rising to a frenzied tempo as the battle begins. Silvestri uses intercut leitmotifs, switching between Dracula's theme and Van Helsing's, reflecting the clash of opposing forces. Here, the music not only enhances the spectacle, but adds emotional stakes, reinforcing themes of sacrifice, transformation, and redemption. Use of silence and subtlety. While Van Helsing is largely a loud, operatic film, Silvestri understands the power of strategic restraint. In several character-driven scenes, such as Anna's reflection on her family's legacy or Frankenstein's plea for mercy, the score dials down. These quiet interludes allow room for character emotion, with minimal instrumentation like solo cello or ambient choral pads providing a gentle emotional undercurrent. Such moments prevent the soundtrack from becoming overwhelming, offering a breathing rhythm within the film's otherwise relentless pacing. Headphone soundtrack reception and legacy. Silvestri's score for Van Helsing has been praised by fans of film music for its thematic strength and memorability. Cinematic energy reminiscent of The Mummy, 1999, and Pirates of the Caribbean. Orchestral richness, blending classical horror styles with modern blockbuster scoring techniques. Though the film itself received mixed critical reviews, the soundtrack remains one of its standout elements. It is often cited as a soundtrack stronger than the film itself, capable of conveying a mythic sense of adventure and dread even on its own. Clapperboard conclusion. A score that amplifies the spectacle. Alan Silvestri's music for Van Helsing, 2004, is a masterclass in thematic, atmospheric, and emotional scoring. His work transforms an already ambitious film into a larger-than-life experience, reinforcing its Gothic roots, heroic undertones, and emotional stakes. By anchoring the film's sprawling narrative and chaotic action in recurring musical motifs, the score helps bring cohesion and dramatic power. Whether through sweeping crescendos or intimate string arrangements, the soundtrack amplifies every moment, turning scenes that might otherwise feel hollow into emotionally resonant set pieces. Ultimately, Silvestri's composition doesn't just accompany Van Helsing, it leads it, echoing the heartbeat of a monster-filled world caught between light and darkness. Van Helsing, 2004, Themes and Messages. Stephen Sommers' Van Helsing, 2004, is not merely an action horror spectacle filled with monsters and Gothic set pieces. Beneath its fast-paced sequences and visual effects lies a dense undercurrent of mythic, religious, and existential themes. While the narrative is stylized and occasionally pulpy, the film reflects timeless ideas about redemption, identity, morality, legacy, and the nature of monstrosity. Despite being an action-oriented blockbuster, Van Helsing weaves these deeper messages into its storytelling through visual metaphors, character arcs, and symbolic conflict. Scales good vs evil and the shades in between. At the core of Van Helsing is the age-old battle between good and evil, but it resists painting these concepts in black and white. Gabriel Van Helsing, although a warrior for the Vatican, is portrayed not as a pure hero, but as a morally conflicted figure with a mysterious and violent past. His identity as the Archangel Gabriel, suggested in the film, adds a mythological weight to his role as both destroyer and redeemer. Count Dracula, the primary antagonist, is not just evil for evil's sake. His actions are driven by a curse and a desire for legacy and power. His search to give life to his monstrous offspring mirrors a twisted form of parenthood, hinting at the corruption of natural order rather than outright villainy. The theme of blurred morality is echoed in several ways. The Vatican's secret order, while claiming righteousness, uses violence, deception, and secrecy. Frankenstein's monster, feared as an abomination, turns out to be the film's most moral and thoughtful character, challenging the audience's expectations about what makes someone truly monstrous. The nature of monsters. The film challenges the classic monster mythos by exploring what it means to be a monster, and whether monstrosity is defined by appearance, origin, or action. Dr. Frankenstein's creation, for example, is sympathetic, articulate, and capable of empathy. Despite being hunted, he shows more humanity than many humans in the film. Van Helsing himself, in a moment of transformation, literally becomes a monster, a werewolf, yet uses his monstrous form to defeat Dracula. This paradox, using the monster within to fight greater evil, suggests that even dark instincts can serve noble ends when directed with purpose. This theme of duality, the internal struggle between the beast and the man, runs throughout the film and ties into broader ideas of identity and redemption. Redemption and forgiveness. Redemption is a powerful thread in Van Helsing, especially for the title character. He begins the story as an agent of violence, haunted by forgotten sins and past lives. His mission to save Anna Valerious' family from damnation becomes personal, not just as a task from the church, but as a path to self-redemption. By confronting Dracula, understanding his own past, as hinted with his connection to Gabriel, and sacrificing emotional connections, like his bond with Anna, Van Helsing embodies the redemptive warrior archetype, someone who must fight both external and internal demons to reclaim lost honor. This idea is supported by recurring visual symbolism. Crosses, holy water, sacred spaces, and rituals are shown not just as tools of battle, but as gateways to absolution and truth. Even the final act, Van Helsing ending Anna's suffering inadvertently, frames redemption as something tragic and incomplete. Legacy, duty, and lineage. Anna Valerious and her family represent the theme of legacy and generational duty. Her mission to destroy Dracula is not about personal vengeance, but about fulfilling a family oath that spans centuries. The Valerious lineage is cursed not by evil acts, but by incomplete justice. This places an existential burden on Anna, one that fuels her courage but also shapes her tragic end. Similarly, Dracula is obsessed with continuing his own legacy, creating life, ensuring the survival of his vampire children, and defying the natural limitations of life and death. Thus, the film presents two opposing forms of legacy. Righteous duty, Anna's side, rooted in sacrifice and honor. Twisted ambition, Dracula's side, rooted in control and dominance. These parallels underscore how choices define the legacy, not bloodlines. Identity and memory. Van Helsing's memory loss serves as a metaphor for spiritual disconnection. He acts on behalf of the church, yet does not know who he truly is or why he fights. His journey is one of reconnect to his forgotten divine origin, to his moral compass, and to his capacity for compassion. The motif of lost identity also appears in Frankenstein's monster and Dracula's undead children, beings unsure of their place in the world. In this way, the film explores a postmodern crisis of self, disguised beneath its supernatural plot. Yin-yang religious symbolism and dualism. Christian symbolism pervades the film. Van Helsing is associated with Gabriel, the Archangel of Judgment. Dracula is a fallen nobleman, cursed and immortal, paralleling Lucifer. Frankenstein's monster becomes a Christ-like figure, feared by men yet inherently kind and sacrificial. The film presents a spiritual dualism, a battle not just between physical good and evil, but between faith and doubt, divine order and chaos. Van Helsing's journey from unquestioning enforcer to thoughtful redeemer mirrors the biblical journey of a fallen angel regaining grace. Mortality, immortality, and the cost of power. One of the film's most haunting subtexts is the fear of death versus the curse of immortality. Dracula and his brides are cursed to live forever without peace. Van Helsing and Anna face constant mortal danger, yet live meaningful, human lives. This contrast raises philosophical questions. Is eternal life worth it if it comes with emptiness and corruption? Is mortality a gift, giving weight to human choices and legacy? These questions are left subtly unanswered, but they linger, particularly after Anna's death and Van Helsing's quiet mourning. Clapperboard conclusion: themes beneath the action. While Van Helsing, 2004, may appear on the surface to be a stylized monster mash, its themes run deep. Through religious iconography, complex character dynamics, and mythological undertones, it explores the conflict between duty and identity, the nature of redemption and forgiveness, the blurred lines between humanity and monstrosity, the struggle for legacy, power, and moral clarity. Although not always subtle, the film attempts to inject meaning into genre tropes, making it more than just a visual effects-driven spectacle. It presents a Gothic tale that is as much about inner battles as it is about defeating external foes. For viewers willing to look beyond the action, Van Helsing offers timeless meditations on faith, self-worth, and the price of salvation. Van Helsing, 2004, Visual Effects and CGI. Directed by Stephen Sommers, Van Helsing, 2004, emerged at a time when Hollywood was rapidly transitioning from practical effects to full-scale CGI environments and creatures. As a big-budget monster hunting epic, the film leaned heavily into digital effects, aiming to blend Gothic horror aesthetics with high-octane fantasy action. The results were ambitious, occasionally groundbreaking, but also polarizing. The visual effects serve as both a spectacle and a reflection of early 2000s digital filmmaking, where innovation occasionally raced ahead of polish. Personal computer integration of CGI into the film's world. From the opening scenes, Van Helsing establishes a highly stylized, supernatural world. The film's use of CGI is vast, ranging from atmospheric enhancements like swirling fog and Gothic castles, to fully digital creatures such as werewolves, Dracula's flying brides, and vampire spawn. The brides of Dracula, for example, are frequently rendered as humanoid bat hybrids in flight, with sweeping transformations mid-scene. Their design, although exaggerated, matches the tone of the story, adding surreal, kinetic energy to their attacks. The vampire offspring, shown hatching from pods and swarming in masses, reflect an over-the-top, grotesque style that leans into horror fantasy. Mr. Hyde, seen early in the Notre Dame bell tower battle, is entirely computer-generated. While his exaggerated cartoonish bulk lacks realism by modern standards, it fits the comic book-like tone of the film and mirrors the stylization used in other monster hunter narratives. While not always seamless, the CGI generally aligns with the heightened reality the film is aiming for. It's not realism the film strives for, but immersion in a graphic novelesque, Gothic world where mythic monsters reign. Cross swords, hash action sequences, and digital staging. One of the most prominent uses of CGI in Van Helsing is in its action choreography. Most major set pieces, whether the chase through a burning village, werewolf fights, or Dracula's icy mountain fortress, are driven by CGI-enhanced backgrounds and digital doubles. The transformation scenes, particularly for the werewolves, are some of the most visually ambitious parts of the film. Limbs stretch, bones crack, and skin tears in gruesome detail, aided by morphing effects and layered animation. The climactic showdown between werewolf Van Helsing and Dracula in his monstrous bat form is entirely digital. The physics are fast, fluid, and exaggerated, resembling a video game cutscene more than grounded cinema. But within the film's mythic tone, this works to elevate the fantasy. However, certain CGI choices, like Dracula's disintegrating vampires or flying camera shots through massive digital environments, can feel over-animated and weightless, occasionally pulling viewers out of the scene. Wrench practical effects versus CGI. While Van Helsing is largely known for its digital wizardry, it doesn't abandon practical effects entirely. The film features detailed sets and props, particularly in the vampire ball sequence, Frankenstein's lab, and the crumbling villages. These grounded physical elements help anchor the more digital scenes. Makeup and prosthetics on characters like Frankenstein's monster blend beautifully with CGI enhancements. The monster's exposed brain, stitched flesh, and glowing blue electrodes look tangible, adding emotional depth to the character. Yet, where practical effects shine in realism and texture, CGI occasionally falls short. Dracula's minions or certain monster transformations exhibit the rubbery physics that plagued early 2000s CGI, revealing the limitations of the technology at the time. Still, the combination of both techniques, when used effectively, offers a theatrical, operatic visual style that fits the film's narrative ambition. Milky Way world-building through visual effects. The film's environments, Transylvanian villages, snowy mountains, underground laboratories, and Dracula's towering fortress, are frequently enhanced or entirely created via CGI. These backdrops contribute to the Gothic fantasy atmosphere, giving the film a sprawling, otherworldly feel. The use of CGI-enhanced matte paintings, for example, creates sweeping vistas that expand the perceived scale of the story. Fog, lightning, and magical effects, like holy weapons and vampire-repelling devices, add layers of supernatural immersion. Despite some artificiality in texture, these elements succeed in transporting viewers to a mythic 19th-century Europe where science, religion, and dark magic collide. Ambition versus execution. It's important to view Van Helsing's visual effects within the context of its time. In 2004, fully digital creatures interacting with live-action environments were still cutting-edge, and the film pushed the boundaries of what could be achieved technically. That said, some effects have not aged gracefully. Creatures sometimes appear disconnected from physical space. Motion blur and lighting inconsistencies occasionally break the illusion of realism. Overuse of green screens in certain chase scenes creates a disjointed feel. Still, the boldness of vision cannot be denied. The sheer scale of effects, over 1,500 VFX shots, is a testament to the filmmaker's commitment to building a rich, immersive world. Clapperboard conclusion: a visual spectacle of its time. Van Helsing, 2004, may not feature flawless visual effects by today's standards, but it remains a landmark of early 2000s fantasy horror CGI. The effects are used not just as window dressing, but as central tools in conveying story, mood, and myth. Whether it's the grotesque rebirth of vampires or the tragic transformation of a man into a werewolf, every digital element is built around character and tone. While some moments veer into CGI overload or cartoonish excess, the majority of the effects, especially when paired with practical sets and makeup, contribute to a visually unique and memorable experience. Ultimately, Van Helsing uses its visual effects not to mirror reality, but to create a theatrical monster opera, rich in style, atmosphere, and dark fantasy. For fans of Gothic spectacle, it delivers exactly what it promises: a monster-filled rollercoaster powered by unrestrained visual ambition. Van Helsing, 2004. Set design and locations. Stephen Sommers' Van Helsing, 2004, thrives in a darkly romantic, Gothic universe steeped in myth, lore, and cinematic extravagance. One of the most distinctive aspects of the film is its set design and use of locations, which play a crucial role in transporting the audience to a fantastical version of 19th-century Europe, brimming with mystery, supernatural beings, and centuries-old secrets. The film's production design, led by Alan Cameron, successfully blends the traditional and the theatrical, creating a visual world that feels immersive, heightened, and often breathtaking. Transylvanian Gothic atmosphere. A significant portion of the film takes place in Transylvania, the iconic homeland of vampires, and the design team leans heavily into Gothic horror tropes: dramatic castles, foggy forests, crumbling villages, and ancient graveyards. These settings aren't merely background elements, they function as extensions of the narrative and the characters. The village of Vaseria is one of the most detailed and textured locations. Designed with cobblestone streets, wooden homes, and shadowy alleys, the village feels lived in and haunted. The crumbling architecture and eerie stillness reflect the constant fear and decay brought on by Dracula's influence. The use of practical sets here adds to the believability, making it feel like a genuine place under siege by the supernatural. The graveyard set, with twisted trees, ornate mausoleums, and creeping mist, delivers classic horror iconography with theatrical flair. It enhances the tone of dread and suspense, especially during scenes involving resurrection and hidden passages. Japanese castle Dracula's Castle. Dracula's lair is one of the most memorable sets in the film. Towering and angular, with massive archways, blood-red lighting, and soaring ceilings, the castle fuses medieval grandeur with vampiric menace. Gothic stained-glass windows, elaborate staircases, and eerie laboratories contribute to its larger-than-life presence. The interiors, particularly the vampire birthing chamber and icy ballroom, feature detailed stone textures, ancient machinery, and surreal architectural elements, blending horror with steampunk aesthetics. The ballroom sequence, in which Dracula hosts a grotesque masquerade, is visually rich with chandeliers, ornate carvings, and period costumes, all lit with a haunting glow. It stands out as a pinnacle of set and costume design coordination. The castle serves as a character in its own right, changing from a luxurious sanctuary to a monstrous labyrinth depending on the story's emotional and action beats. High-voltage sign Frankenstein's lab and the Steam Age influence. The design of Frankenstein's laboratory pays homage to James Whale's Frankenstein, 1931, but with updated steampunk flourishes. Electric coils, arcing Tesla machines, gear-driven elevators, and bubbling tanks of green fluid fill the space with kinetic energy. These elements reflect the scientific ambition and tragic madness that define the Frankenstein myth. The film frequently blends 19th-century Gothic with Industrial Revolution-inspired tech, creating a world where monster hunting feels plausible. Van Helsing's weapons, carriages, and gadgets also exhibit this steam-powered, gear-laden design philosophy, helping ground the fantastical action in a semi-believable technological era. Evergreen outdoor and natural locations. While many of the film's key locations are built sets or digitally extended environments, the use of natural exteriors adds texture and scale. Sweeping views of mist-covered mountains, icy caves, and gloomy woods offer a stark contrast to the more ornate interiors. The Carpathian Mountains and snow-covered paths were partially filmed in Czech Republic and layered with CGI to enhance their dramatic effect. These environments amplify the sense of isolation and danger, especially during chase or ambush scenes. The Parisian setting, particularly the cathedral battle with Mr. Hyde, is less deeply explored but offers a touch of international scope. Notre Dame is depicted with a grim, Gothic tone that sets the stage for Van Helsing's introduction. Performing art stylistic choices in design. The film's production design leans heavily into stylization rather than realism. Everything is heightened: the scale of the architecture, the detail of the weaponry, and the costumes that match each locale. These choices are intentional. Van Helsing isn't aiming for historical accuracy but for a mythical, fairy-tale Europe. Color palettes are distinct across sets. Dracula's castle is bathed in icy blues and silvers. Frankenstein's lab glows with greens and sparks of electricity. Transylvania features earthy browns and fog-drenched greys, grounding the supernatural in gritty reality. The sets frequently use verticality: spiraling towers, deep catacombs, high balconies, adding tension and movement to the action scenes. Practical builds vs CGI environments. What truly grounds Van Helsing is the commitment to practical sets. While CGI enhances large-scale environments or impossible architectures, many interior sets were physically built on sound stages, giving the actors real spaces to interact with. This helps maintain tactile believability, especially in action sequences where characters collide with walls, fall through floors, or swing from chandeliers. However, some of the fully digital landscapes, especially large establishing shots of Dracula's castle or the flying vampire hordes, can occasionally feel artificial. But even when digital, the design language remains cohesive, maintaining the film's artistic consistency. Trophy conclusion: a grand Gothic stage. In Van Helsing, 2004, the set design and locations do more than establish place. They shape the film's emotional tone, visual identity, and mythological underpinnings. Whether it's a vampire-infested village, a haunted graveyard, or a sprawling castle laboratory, each location reflects the supernatural stakes and the characters' internal struggles. The design evokes classic horror films, Victorian adventure tales, and steampunk fantasy, all fused into a world that feels theatrical and immersive. Even when the CGI falters, the production design holds strong, grounding the narrative with atmosphere and a rich visual texture. For audiences seeking a visually stylized monster adventure, the sets and locations of Van Helsing are a standout element that continue to impress, even decades later. Van Helsing, 2004, Dialogue and Script Analysis. Van Helsing, directed and written by Stephen Sommers, attempts to blend horror, action, and fantasy with a pulpy adventure tone. Its dialogue and script are designed to match this ambitious blend of genres. While the film's script is often criticized for favoring spectacle over substance, it still contains moments of character-defining dialogue, classic monster movie homage, and thematic statements that reflect the film's internal mythology. Speaking head in silhouette tone of the dialogue: pulpy, dramatic, and mythic. The film's dialogue embraces a heightened, theatrical style that mirrors the Gothic aesthetic of the film. Characters don't always speak in grounded, everyday language. Instead, they frequently deliver lines laden with lore, stakes, and exposition. This is intentional. Van Helsing isn't aiming for realism, but for the stylized tone of classic horror and adventure cinema. For example, Van Helsing's conversations with Carl, his comic relief friar companion, often contrast deadpan seriousness with comic levity, creating a dynamic that helps move the story forward while relieving tension. Dracula, played flamboyantly by Richard Roxburgh, speaks in a manner reminiscent of old-school horror villains, grandiose, poetic, and dripping with menace. His lines are often melodramatic but are delivered with conviction that makes them memorable. Speech balloon key standout lines. Despite its fast-paced and action-heavy structure, the film features several lines that stand out, either because of their emotional weight, campy bravado, or iconic monster movie flair. Van Helsing, Hugh Jackman. You're not a bad person. You're a good person who's done bad things. Every saint has a past, every sinner has a future. This line showcases the film's underlying theme of redemption and blurred moral lines, particularly as it pertains to Van Helsing's mysterious past and his internal struggles. Count Dracula. I have no heart. I feel no love, no fear, no joy, no sorrow. I am hollow, and I will live forever. This line reveals Dracula's existential emptiness and provides thematic weight to his otherwise flamboyant villainy. It also humanizes him in a twisted way, showing that immortality has come at the cost of emotion. Carl, David Wenham. Why does it smell like wet dog in here? A moment of comic relief that breaks up the brooding tension. Carl's quips inject much-needed humor into the script and offer viewers a grounded character amidst the Gothic absurdity. Scroll exposition and lore-heavy writing. Much of the script is used to deliver exposition, necessary to unpack the complex mythology of the film. From vampire birthing rituals to secret religious orders and Van Helsing's own mysterious past, characters frequently explain backstories, rules, and stakes through dialogue. While this contributes to the world-building, some of the exposition is overly dense or awkwardly inserted, making certain scenes feel like infodumps rather than natural conversations. However, the religious and mythological elements, especially the lore surrounding the Order of the Holy Knights and the connection between Dracula and Frankenstein's monster, are framed with a kind of biblical grandeur that enhances the film's epic tone. Themes reflected in dialogue. The script often uses dialogue to reflect major themes such as redemption and identity. Van Helsing's uncertain past and his desire for redemption are woven into several conversations, especially with Anna and Carl. The nature of evil. Characters debate whether monsters are inherently evil or the result of tragic circumstances, particularly in regard to Frankenstein's creature and even Dracula. Duty versus desire. Both Van Helsing and Anna are bound by duty, and their dialogue explores how this conflict limits their ability to pursue personal happiness. These themes give the film's dialogue philosophical subtext, even if the delivery sometimes veers into melodrama. Performing arts character-specific dialogue styles. Each primary character is written with a distinct vocal rhythm. Van Helsing, reserved, stoic, with occasional dry wit. His minimalistic dialogue adds to his mystique. Anna Valerious, Kate Beckinsale, passionate, driven, sometimes overly expository, but grounded in emotional motivation, her family's curse and legacy. Dracula, flourishing and theatrical, combining charm with psychopathy. Carl, humorous, intelligent, awkward, serves as an audience surrogate and comic relief. This differentiation allows the characters to remain distinct even when the plot becomes chaotic. Criticism of the script. While the film's visual spectacle is widely appreciated, the script has received criticism for being overwritten in exposition-heavy scenes, underwritten in emotional development, inconsistent in tone, shifting rapidly between horror, comedy, action, and romance. Some viewers and critics felt that the rapid-fire plot progression left little room for the dialogue to breathe or allow for deeper character introspection. Conclusion: dialogue as theatrical narrative tool. In Van Helsing, 2004, the dialogue and script serve as tools to drive plot, establish mythos, and reinforce genre stylization rather than mirror naturalistic human conversation. While not always nuanced or subtle, the dialogue remains consistent with the film's operatic tone. Though it may lack the depth of more grounded fantasy narratives, its script embraces the spirit of classic monster films, offering a blend of camp, lore, and cinematic bravado. Its lines may not all be quotable, but they contribute to a world where every conversation feels like it's part of an epic fable. Van Helsing, 2004, Genre Execution Analysis. Stephen Sommers' Van Helsing, 2004, is an ambitious cinematic hybrid that attempts to fuse several classic genres into one high-octane spectacle. At its core, the film is a Gothic action-adventure with horror roots, drawing heavily from classic Universal monster movies while infusing them with modern blockbuster pacing and visual flair. The result is a film that is both homage and reinvention, though not without its genre clashes. #Gothic horror roots, faithful homage with modern overtones. Van Helsing draws its inspiration from the golden age of horror cinema, specifically the Universal Monsters era of the 1930s and 1940s. This is evident in the inclusion of iconic characters like Count Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, the Wolfman, and Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. The visual tone, sets, and mythos maintain a Gothic horror aesthetic, featuring candlelit castles, stormy graveyards, and fog-drenched landscapes. However, unlike traditional horror, Van Helsing does not rely heavily on suspense or fear. Instead, it replaces dread with adrenaline, using its horror icons more as action figures than true sources of terror. In this way, the film follows genre conventions in theme and character, but subverts them in tone and function, turning what would be a slow-burn horror narrative into a non-stop fantasy action spectacle. Cross swords, action adventure, high energy pacing, supernatural set pieces. The film's primary execution leans toward action adventure, reminiscent of films like Indiana Jones or Sommers' Own the Mummy, 1999. From the opening prologue to the final mountaintop showdown, Van Helsing keeps its momentum with elaborate combat sequences involving supernatural creatures, chases through medieval villages, mid-air battles between vampires and werewolves, explosive CGI-driven confrontations. While these elements cater well to fans of high-stakes fantasy adventure, they overwhelm the film's horror origins, shifting it toward popcorn entertainment rather than slow-burning atmosphere. The action is stylized and excessive, often prioritizing visual flair over character depth or narrative clarity. This bold choice defines the film's genre identity, but it also risks alienating purists who expected a more grounded or suspenseful tone. Face screaming in fear horror elements, style over substance. Despite being rooted in horror mythology, the film rarely attempts to frighten its audience. Instead, the creatures are presented more as tragic figures or action antagonists than terrifying monsters. The horror is aesthetic, not emotional. Plenty of blood-red lighting, ominous organs playing in Dracula's castle, and grotesque creature designs, but few moments of genuine fear or suspense. This shows a deliberate genre inversion. Rather than using horror to provoke terror, Van Helsing uses it to enhance world-building and create a fantastical, immersive universe. Juggler # balance of genres, overstuffed but entertaining. Van Helsing attempts to juggle several tones. Action and fantasy dominate most sequences. Adventure and mystery are supported by the mission structure of the plot. Romance between Van Helsing and Anna Valerious adds a fleeting emotional beat. Humor, mostly delivered by Carl, the monk inventor sidekick, offers comic relief. While the diversity of tones keeps the film engaging, it can also lead to tonal inconsistency. The film sometimes struggles to maintain emotional weight when humorous or exaggerated moments undercut serious developments. Still, the blending of genres creates a fast-paced, constantly shifting narrative that appeals to a broad audience, even if it sacrifices cohesion in the process. Electric light bulb fresh ideas versus genre clichés. Van Helsing walks a fine line between genre innovation and cliché. Fresh ideas. The concept of combining multiple horror legends into a shared cinematic world predates the current trend of cinematic universes. The idea of turning Gabriel Van Helsing into a James Bond-style monster hunter with gadgets and a shadowy organization, the Vatican, gives the character a new dimension. The film explores moral ambiguity, portraying monsters like Frankenstein's creature as sympathetic and Van Helsing as a killer grappling with his past. Genre clichés. Damsels in distress, conveniently timed resurrections, and save the world by midnight tropes are abundant. Overuse of CGI-heavy boss battles, especially in the third act, follow a familiar action fantasy structure. The romance subplot feels underdeveloped and formulaic, existing more as a narrative checkbox than a genuine emotional arc. Narrative structure, linear with pulp storytelling roots. The film follows a conventional hero's journey structure. Call to adventure, Van Helsing is sent to Transylvania by the Vatican. Tests and trials, battles against Dracula's brides, Frankenstein's monster, and the werewolf curse. Climax, final confrontation with Dracula. Resolution, redemption, loss, and a return to solitude. While the structure is standard, the pulp-style pacing and episodic storytelling give it the feel of a serialized adventure. Each new location introduces a different kind of monster or conflict, almost like a supernatural anthology bound together by Van Helsing's quest. Conclusion, a genre blender with operatic energy. Van Helsing, 2004, does not adhere strictly to the rules of any one genre. Instead, it blends horror, fantasy, action, romance, and comedy into a single, operatic spectacle. While this fusion creates a wildly entertaining ride, it can also feel overstuffed and chaotic, depending on viewer expectations. Its genre execution is bold and visually inventive, though not always subtle or coherent. It subverts horror expectations by transforming monsters into warriors and heroes into flawed weapons. It is a love letter to classic monster cinema, but told through the lens of a 21st-century action blockbuster. Ultimately, Van Helsing succeeds more as a stylized genre mashup than a traditional horror film, and its ability to fuse multiple tones, however messily, has given it cult status among fans of dark fantasy and monster adventures. Van Helsing, 2004, Social and Cultural Commentary, In-Depth Analysis. Stephen Sommers' Van Helsing, 2004, is not a film that overtly positions itself as a commentary on contemporary politics or culture, yet beneath its stylized surface of supernatural action and Gothic fantasy lies a tapestry of allegorical and symbolic threads. These subtle themes reflect cultural anxieties, religious conflicts, and moral ambiguity, though they are not central to the film's primary intent, which remains entertainment. Scales # good versus evil, a binary view reconsidered. One of the most persistent undercurrents in Van Helsing is the questioning of absolute morality. The film challenges the traditional black and white dichotomy of good versus evil. Van Helsing, the hero, is an agent of a secret religious order sent to eliminate supernatural threats, yet he is haunted by a mysterious past and at times kills without full understanding or mercy. Dracula, traditionally the epitome of evil, is given a motive rooted in cursed immortality and tragic loss, framing his villainy within the context of existential suffering. Frankenstein's monster, feared and hunted, turns out to be a victim of circumstance, intelligent and kind-hearted, subverting the idea of monster altogether. Through these characterizations, the film critiques the simplicity of moral binaries that often dominate religious or cultural narratives. It subtly suggests that morality must be examined in context, not just decreed from authority, a message increasingly relevant in modern debates over justice, faith, and systemic violence. Dove # religious institutions and blind obedience. Van Helsing is an operative of a Vatican-run organization, operating in secrecy to cleanse the world of evil. This setup introduces a subtle critique of religious orthodoxy and militant zeal. The secret society is portrayed as dogmatic and results-driven, not interested in truth, but in eradicating threats. They treat Van Helsing more like a weapon than a human being. Van Helsing himself is shown to be conflicted, loyal to his mission but increasingly questioning its righteousness. This dynamic mirrors real-world tensions between individual conscience and institutional dogma, particularly in how organized religions or powerful agencies define morality and enforce order. The film doesn't dive deeply into this theme but lays the groundwork for an interpretation that questions the morality of violence justified by faith or divine mandate, a timeless issue in both historical and modern contexts. Otherness and empathy for the monstrous. The film presents a strong thematic undercurrent regarding the fear of the other and how society deals with those deemed unnatural or dangerous. This is evident in the treatment of Frankenstein's monster, who is misjudged and hunted simply for existing. The werewolf curse, which causes otherwise noble men, including Anna's brother, to be feared, exiled, or killed, regardless of their true selves. Van Helsing himself is marked as an outsider, possibly immortal, possibly damned, and always alone. These elements parallel modern issues of xenophobia, discrimination, and social exclusion. Van Helsing uses monster mythology to illustrate how society often dehumanizes what it doesn't understand, choosing to eliminate threats rather than empathize or seek truth. In this light, the film encourages viewers to see monsters not as purely evil, but as reflections of human suffering, fear, and complexity, a progressive idea echoing through contemporary discussions on mental illness, marginalization, and human rights. European castle gender roles, a half-step toward progress. While Van Helsing is largely dominated by male protagonists and antagonists, it does attempt to introduce a strong female lead in the form of Anna Valerious. She is portrayed as brave, capable in battle, and committed to protecting her family legacy. However, her character arc is ultimately sidelined by romantic tropes, and she is sacrificed for Van Helsing's narrative development. Anna's role reflects a transitional moment in action fantasy films, a time when female characters were beginning to gain agency but were still confined by the genre's male-centric storytelling structures. The film attempts to empower its female lead, but ultimately reinforces a dated formula, showing the industry's slow shift toward gender equity. Monsters as symbols of inner conflict. Each creature in Van Helsing can be read as a metaphor for human psychological or societal struggles. Dracula represents eternal emptiness and power without purpose, a critique of unchecked ambition and emotional detachment. The werewolf symbolizes duality and suppressed rage, perhaps reflecting the conflict between civilization and primal instinct. Frankenstein's monster is a symbol of scientific consequence and social rejection, aligning with debates around technology, creation, and human responsibility. Through these figures, the film engages with universal fears and cultural archetypes, touching upon what it means to be human, what makes a person good or evil, and how identity is often shaped by others' perceptions. Globe showing Europe-Africa global anxieties in a Gothic world. Released in 2004, in a post-9/11 world, Van Helsing unconsciously taps into themes of global anxiety, the unknown enemy, and preemptive action. Van Helsing is sent across borders to eliminate threats before they reach his own people. He does so based on incomplete knowledge, under orders from a powerful institution. The consequences of his actions are often unforeseen, suggesting a cautionary tale about unilateral interventionism. Though not explicit, These themes echo broader discussions on foreign policy, ideological extremism, and the ethics of force that defined the early 2000s. Conclusion: subtle themes in a spectacle-driven world. While Van Helsing, 2004, does not set out to be a message-driven film, it contains layered cultural and philosophical ideas for those willing to look beyond its monster mash action. It uses horror and fantasy as a canvas to explore the murkiness of morality, the dangers of blind faith, the pain of exclusion, the complexity of identity, the pitfalls of ideological warfare. However, most of these themes are submerged beneath CGI-driven spectacle and fast-paced storytelling. For casual viewers, the messages may feel incidental or vague. For analytical audiences, they provide rich subtext worth exploring. Van Helsing may not revolutionize social commentary in cinema, but it uses familiar characters to mirror complex truths, making it more than just a monster-hunting blockbuster action-packed spectacle, immediate engagement through sensory thrills. From the film's very first moments, a black-and-white prologue evoking 1930s horror, Van Helsing immerses the viewer in a world of dramatic tension, exotic locales, and high-stakes conflict. The action sequences are frequent and elaborate, designed to sustain adrenaline and visual awe. The opening scene in Transylvania, with Dracula's castle under siege, immediately sets the tone, stylized, intense, and cinematic. The Vatican battle with Mr. Hyde, rooftop chases, werewolf attacks, and vampire assaults are all choreographed to maximize excitement. The climactic battle between Van Helsing, as a werewolf, and Dracula, in monstrous form, provides a CGI-heavy emotional crescendo. These sequences aim to keep viewers on the edge of their seat, delivering consistent spectacle. For audiences drawn to kinetic energy and fantasy world-building, the film delivers ample engagement through sheer visual momentum. Faced with open-mouth shock, awe, and Gothic wonder, a feast of the macabre. The film's use of monster lore taps into deep-rooted cultural fascinations with the supernatural and the grotesque. By uniting characters like Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, and werewolves under one narrative roof, Van Helsing creates a shared horror fantasy universe that engages nostalgic curiosity and fan-based excitement. Viewers are often surprised or delighted by twists on familiar myths, such as Dracula's vampiric offspring or the werewolf as Dracula's true nemesis. Stylized transformations, especially the gruesome contortions of vampires into winged creatures. Gothic production design, with dark castles, hidden laboratories, and ancient catacombs that evoke both wonder and dread. These elements offer a heightened emotional texture, not necessarily in the form of traditional sadness or laughter, but in awe, suspense, and eerie fascination. Broken heart emotional resonance, fleeting but present. While the film is not built around emotional depth, Van Helsing does make some effort to anchor its narrative in character-driven stakes, which can spark empathy. Anna Valerious' quest to redeem her family's legacy adds a layer of personal sacrifice and nobility. Her relationship with Van Helsing, although underdeveloped, brings moments of tenderness and mutual respect, culminating in a tragic finale. Frankenstein's monster provides the most emotionally resonant scenes, as his loneliness and inherent humanity contrast with his monstrous exterior. However, these emotional beats are often overshadowed by action and pacing, meaning that while viewers may feel a twinge of emotion, the film does not dwell long enough to let those moments truly land with full weight. Speech balloon audience discussion, nostalgia and genre fusion. One of the most engaging aspects of Van Helsing is the intertextual dialogue it invites. Fans of classic horror films enjoy spotting references to Bram Stoker, Mary Shelley, and vintage Universal monsters. Genre fans appreciate the fusion of horror, adventure, and superhero tropes, sparking debates about how successfully the film blends them. Some viewers engage critically, discussing whether the film sacrifices depth for style, or how it compares to other monster hunter stories like Blade or The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Though not necessarily a film that demands philosophical reflection, Van Helsing inspires discussions about genre, adaptation, and cinematic excess, particularly among fans of horror and fantasy.